Hey everyone, going to pick up reading chapter 8 of The Hobbit. This will be part 2. That night, they ate their very last scraps and crumbs of food, and the next morning, when they woke, the first thing they noticed was that they were still gnawingly hungry. And the next thing was that it was raining, that here and there a drip of it was dropping heavily on the forest floor. That only reminded them that they were also parchingly thirsty. Without doing anything to relieve them, you can't quench a terrible thirst by standing under giant oaks and waiting for a chance drip to fall on your tongue. The only scrap of comfort there came unexpectedly from Bomber. He woke up suddenly and sat up, scratching his head. And he couldn't make out where he was at all, nor why he felt so hungry, for he had forgotten everything that had happened since they started their journey that May morning long ago. The last thing that he remembered was the party at the Hobbit's house. They had a great difficulty in making him believe their tale of all their adventures they had had since. When he heard that there was nothing to eat, he sat down and wept, for he felt very weak and wobbly in the legs. Why ever did I wake up? He cried. I was having such beautiful dreams. I dreamed I was walking in a forest rather like this one, only lit with torches on the trees and lamps swinging from the branches and fires burning on the ground. And there was a great feast going on forever. The woodland king was there with a crown of leaves, and there was merry singing. I couldn't count or describe the things there were to eat and drink. You need not try, said Thorin. In fact, if you can talk about something else, you had better be silent. We were quite annoyed enough with you as it is. If you hadn't waked up, we should have left you to the idiotic dreams in the forest. You are no joke to carry, even after weeks of short commons. There was nothing now to be done but to tighten their belts round their empty stomachs and hoist their empty sacks and packs and trudge through the track without any great hope of ever getting to the end before they lay down and died of starvation. This they did all that day, going very slowly and wearily, while Bomber kept on wailing that his legs would not carry him and that he wanted to lie down and sleep. No, you don't, they said. Let your legs take their share. We've carried you far enough. All the same, he suddenly refused to go a step further and flung himself to the ground. Go on, if you must, he said. I'm just going to lie here and sleep and dream of food, and if I can't get it any other way, I hope I never wake up again. In that very moment, Balin, who was a little way ahead, called out, What was that? I thought I saw a wrinkle of light in the forest. They all looked, and longishly way off, it seemed, they saw a red twinkle in the dark. Then another and another sprang out beside it. Even Bomber got up, and he hurried along then, not caring if it was trolls or goblins. The light was in front of them and to the left of the path. And when it was at last they had drawn level with it, it seemed plain that torches and fires were burning under the trees, but a good way off their track. It looks as if my dreams were coming true, gasped Bomber, puffing up behind. He wanted to rush straight off into the wood after the lights, but the others remembered only too well the warnings of the wizard and of Bjorn. The feast would be no good if we never got back alive from it, said Thorin. But without a feast, we shan't remain alive much longer anyway, said Bomber. Bilbo heartily agreed with him. They argued about backwards and forwards for a long while, until they agreed at length to send out a couple of spies to creep near the lights and find out more about them. And then they couldn't agree on who was to be sent. No one seemed anxious to run the chance of being lost and never finding his friends again. In the end, in spite of warnings, hunger decided them, because Bomber kept on describing all the good things that were being eaten according to his dream in the woodland feast. So they all left the path and plunged into the forest together. After a good deal of creeping and crawling, they peered round the trunks and looked into a clearing where some trees had been felled and the ground was leveled. There were many people there, elvish looking, all dressed in green and in a circle. There was a fire in their midst, and there were torches fastened to some of the trees round about. But most splendid sight of all, they were eating and drinking and laughing merrily. The smell of roast meats was so enchanting that, without waiting to consult one another, every one of them got up and scrambled forwards into the ring, and with the idea of begging for some food. No sooner had the first stepped into the clearing than all the lights went out, as if by magic. Somebody kicked the fire, and it went up in rockets of glittering sparks and vanished. They were lost in a completely lightless dark, and they could not even find one another, not for a long time at any rate. After blundering frantically into the gloom, falling over logs, bumping crash into trees, then shouting, calling till they must have waked everything in the forest for miles. At last they managed to gather themselves in a bundle and count themselves by touch. But by that time they had, of course, quite forgotten in what direction the path lay, and they were all hopelessly lost, at least till morning. There was nothing, for it was but to settle down for the night where they were. They didn't even dare to search on the ground for scraps of food for fear of becoming separated again. But they had not been lying long, and Bilbo was only getting drowsy when Dory, whose turn it was to watch first, said in a loud whisper, "The lights are coming back out again, over there, and there are more than ever of them." Up they all jumped. There, sure enough, not far away, were scores of twinkling lights. And they heard the voices and the laughter quite plainly. They crept slowly towards them in a single line, and each touching the back of the one in front. When they got near, Thorin said, "No rushing forward this time. No one is to stir from hiding till I say. I shall send Mr. Baggins, one of the first, to talk to them. They won't be frightened of him." What about me of them, thought Bilbo. And anyway, I hope they don't do anything nasty to him. When they got to the edge of the circle of lights, they pushed Bilbo suddenly from behind. Before he had time to slip on the ring, he stumbled forward into the full blaze of the fire and torches. It was no good. Out went the lights again, and complete darkness fell. If it had been difficult collecting themselves before, it was far worse this time. They simply could not find the Hobbit. Every time they counted themselves, it only made 13. They shouted and called, "Bilbo Baggins, Hobbit, you dreaded Hobbit! Hi, Hobbit! Confiscate you! Confusticate you! Where are you?" Other things of that sort. There was no answer. They were just giving up hope when Dory stumbled across him by sheer luck. In the dark, he fell over what he thought was a log, and he found it was the Hobbit curled up fast asleep. It took a deal of shaking to wake him, and when he was awake, he was not pleased at all. I was having such a lovely dream, he grumbled, all about having a great, gorgeous dinner. Good heavens, he's gone like Bomber, they said. Don't tell us about your dreams. Dream dinners aren't any good, and we can't share them. They are the best I'm likely to get in this beastly place, he muttered. And he lay down beside the dwarves and tried to go back to sleep and find his dream again. But that was not the last light in the forest. Later, when the night must have been getting old, Healy, who was watching then, came and roused them all again, saying, "There's a regular blaze of light begun not far away. Hundreds of torches, many fires must have been lit suddenly and by magic. And hark to the singing and the harps." After lying and listening for a while, they found that they could not resist the desire to go nearer and to try once more to get help. Up they got again, and this time the result was disastrous. The feast that they now saw was greater and more magnificent than before. And at the head of the long line of feasters sat a woodland king with a crown of leaves upon his gold hair, very much as Bomber had described the figure in his dream. The elvish folk were passing bowls from hand to hand and across the fires, and some were harping and many were singing. Their gleaming hair was twined with flowers, green and white gems glinting on the collars of their belts, and their faces, and their songs were filled with mirth. Loud and clear and fair were those songs, and out stepped Thorin into their midst. Dead silence fell in the middle of a word. Out in all the light, the fires leaped up in a black smoke. Ashes and cinders were in the eyes of the dwarves, and the wood was filled with their clamor and their cries. Bilbo found himself running round and round, as he thought, and calling, "Dory, Nori, Ori, Oin, Gloin, Feely, Keely, Bomber, Biffer, Boffer, Dwalin, Balin, and Thorin, Oakenshield," while people he could not see or feel were doing the same all around him, with an occasional "Bilbo" thrown in. But the cries of the others got steadily farther and fainter. And though after a while it seemed to him they changed to yells and cries for help in the far distance, all noise last died right away. He was left alone in complete silence and darkness. That was one of his most miserable moments. But he soon made up his mind. It was no good trying to do anything till day came or some little light, and quite useless to go blundering about, tiring himself out with no hope of any breakfast to revive him. So he sat down, with his back to a tree, and not for the last time fell to thinking of his far distant hobbit hole, with its beautiful pantries. He was deep in thoughts of bacon and eggs and toast and butter when he felt something touch him, something like a strong, sticky string was against his left hand, and when he tried to move, he found that his legs were already wrapped in the same stuff, so when he got up, he fell over. Then the great spider, who had been busy tying him up while he dozed, came from behind and came at him. He could only see the thing's eyes, but he could feel its hairy legs as it struggled to wind its abominable threads round and round him. It was lucky that he had come to his senses in time. Soon he would not have been able to move at all. As it was, he had a desperate fight before he got free. He beat the creature off with his hands and was trying to poison him to keep him quiet. as small spiders do to flies, until he remembered his sword and he drew it out, and the spider jumped back, and he had time to cut his legs loose. After that, it was his turn to attack, and the spider evidently was not used to things that carried such stings at their sides, or it would have hurried away quicker. Bilbo came at it before it could disappear and stuck it with his sword right in the eyes. Then it went mad and leaped and danced and flung out its legs in horrible jerks until he killed it with another stroke. And then he fell down and remembered nothing more for a while. There was the usual dim gray light of the forest day about him. When he came to his senses, the spider lay dead beside him, and his sword blade was stained black. Somehow, the killing of the giant spider, all alone by himself in the dark, without help from the wizard or the dwarves or anyone else, made a great difference to Bilbo Baggins. He felt a different person, and much fiercer and bolder in spite of an empty stomach, as he wiped his sword in the grass and put it back into its sheath. I will give you a name, he said to it, and I shall call you Sting. After that, he set out to explore. The forest was grim and silent, and obviously he had first of all to look for his friends, who were not likely to be very far off, unless they had been made prisoners by the elves or worse things. Bilbo felt that it was unsafe to shout, and he stood a long while wondering in what direction the path lay, and in what direction he should go first to look for the dwarves. Oh, why did we not remember Bjorn's advice and Gandalf's, he lamented. What a mess we're in now. I only wish it was we. It is a horrible thing being all alone. And in the end, he made as good a guess as he could at the direction from which the cries for help had come in the night. And by luck, he was born in a good share of it. He guessed more or less right, as you will see. Having made up his mind, he crept along as cleverly as he could. Hobbits are clever in quietness, especially in woods, as I've already told you. Also, Bilbo had slipped on his ring before he started. That is why the spiders neither saw him nor heard him coming. He had picked his way stealthily for some distance when he noticed a place of dense black shadow ahead of him. Black even for the forest, like a patch of midnight that had never been cleared away. As he drew nearer, he saw that it was made of spider webs, one behind and over and tangled with another. Suddenly he saw, too, that there were spiders, huge and horrible, sitting in the branches above him. And ring or no ring, he trembled with fear lest they should discover him. Standing behind the tree, watching the group of them for some time, and then, in the silence and stillness of the wood, he realized that these loathsome creatures were speaking one to another. Their voices were sort of thin, creaking, and hissing, but he could make out many of the words that they said. They were talking about the dwarves. It was a sharp struggle, but worth it, said that one. What nasty, thick skins they have, to be sure, and I'll wager that there is good juice inside them. Aye, they'll make fine eating when they've hung a bit, said another. Don't hang 'em too long, said a third. They're not as fat as they might be. Been feeding none too well of late, I should guess. Kill 'em, I say, hissed the fourth. Kill 'em now and hang 'em dead for a while. They're dead now, I'll warrant, said the first. That they are not. I saw one struggling just now, just coming around again. I should say after a beautiful sleep. I'll show you. With that, one of the fat spiders ran along the rope until it came to a dozen bundles hanging in a row from the high branch. Bilbo was horrified. Now that he noticed them for the first time, dangling in the shadows, to see a dwarvish foot sticking out of the bottoms of some of the bundles, or here and there a tip of nose or a bit of beard, or of a hood. To the fattest of those bundles the spider went. It is poor old Bomber, I'll bet, thought Bilbo, and nipped hard at the nose that stuck out. There was a muffled yelp inside, and a toe shot up and kicked the spider straight and hard. And there was life in Bomber still. There was a noise like a kicking of flabby football, kicking of a flabby football, and that enraged the spider. He fell off the branch, only catching himself with his own thread just in time. The others laughed. You were quite right, they said. The meat's alive and kicking. I'll soon put an end to that, he hissed, and the angry spider climbed back into the branch. Bilbo saw that the moment he had come, when he must do something, that the moment had come when he must do something. He could not even get up at the brutes, and he had nothing to shoot with. But looking about, he saw that in this place there were many stones lying in what appeared to be a now dry little watercourse, and Bilbo was a pretty fair shot with a stone. And it didn't take him long to find a nice, smooth, egg-shaped one that fitted his hand cozily. As a boy, he used to practice throwing stones at things until rabbits and squirrels, and even birds, got out of his way as quick as lightning if they saw him stoop. And even grown up, he still spent a deal of his time at quoits, throwing darts, shooting at the wand, bowls, ninepins, and other quiet games of the aiming and throwing sort. Indeed, he could do lots of things besides blowing smoke rings, asking riddles, and cooking that I haven't had to tell you about. There is no time now. While he was picking up stones, a spider had reached Bomber, and soon he would have been dead. That moment, Bilbo threw. The stone struck the spider plunk on the head, and it dropped senseless off the tree, flopped to the ground, with all its legs curled up. The next stone went whizzing through the big web, snapping its cords and ticking off the spider sitting at the middle of it. Whack, dead. After that, there was a deal of commotion in the spider colony, and they forgot the dwarves for a bit. I can tell you. They could not see Bilbo, but they could make out a good guess at the direction from which the stones were coming. As quick as lightning, they came running and swinging towards the Hobbit, flinging out their long threads in all directions till the air seemed full of waving snares. Bilbo, however, soon slipped away to a different place. The idea came to him to lead the furious spiders further and further away from the dwarves, if he could, to make them curious, excited, and angry all at once. When about 50 had gone off to the place where he had stood before, he threw some more stones at these, and at others who stopped behind. Then, dancing among the trees, he began to sing a song to infuriate them and bring them all after him, and also to let the dwarves hear his voice. This is what he sang. Old fat spider spinning in a tree, old fat spider can't see me. Attercop, Attercop, won't you stop? Stop your spinning and look for me. Old Tom Noddy, all the big body, old Tom Noddy can't spy me. Attercop, Attercop, down you drop. You'll never catch me up your tree. Not very good, perhaps, but then you must remember that he had to make it up himself on the spur of a very awkward moment. It did what he wanted, anyway, and as he sang, he threw some more stones and stamped Practically all the spiders in the place came after him. Some dropped to the ground, others raced along the branches, swung from tree to tree, or cast new ropes across the dark spaces. They made for his noise far quicker than he expected. They were frightfully angry. Quite apart from the stones, no spider had ever liked being called Attercop, and Tom Noddy, of course, is insulting to anybody. Off Bilbo scuttled to a fresh place, but several of the spiders had run now to different points in the glade where they lived, and were busy spinning webs across all the spaces between the tree stems. Very soon the Hobbit would have been caught in a thick fence of them all around him. At last was the spider's idea. Standing now in the middle of the hunting and spinning insects, Bilbo plucked up his courage and began a new song. Lazy Lob and Crazy Cob were weaving webs to wind me. I am far more sweet than other meat, but still they cannot find me. Here am I, naughty little fly. You are fat and lazy, you cannot trap me, though you try and your cobwebs crazy. With that, he turned and found that the last space between two tall trees had been closed with a web. But luckily, not a proper web. Only great strands of double-thick spider rope run hastily backwards and forwards from the trunk to trunk. Out came his sword. He slashed the threads to pieces and went off singing. And I'll stop there for today. Thanks for listening.